We've hit 11 o'clock. Gary, should we get started?
We should get started.
All righty. Well, again, welcome everybody. This is Jonathan Koppas, the University of Illinois.
And Gary Schnitke from the University of Illinois, and we are going to be talking about the Farm Bill decisions that you have to make here today, or make here in the next while, and we're going to cover that on this webinar. Again, as you're going through this webinar, if you have any questions, type them in your box, and we will answer them as we go. That's why we have two people here, so that one of us will know the answer.
Absolutely. You should also see on your screen, hopefully you got a split screen in front of you. On one side is the presentation itself, talking about the Farm Bill decisions. And then the other side of the screen is the front page of the Agricultural Policy Analysis System, the APAS system. We're going to go through that. That is the online payment calculator or web tool. Pick your favorite descriptive term. And so hopefully you see both of those on your screen. If not, let Jim know by typing in a concern. And with that, Gary, let's get started.
Yeah, and this is just not an effort of the University of Illinois. We've had quite a few institutions involved with that. You see that those listed over to the left. University of Illinois, Watson Associates did a lot of the APAS tool. Ohio State, Michigan State, Delaware State, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, North Carolina, A&T, and Montana State University have been involved in this effort. So we want to thank them and for all their help in doing this. We have two resources on the web that you can look at. We just want to point those out. First is the Farm Bill Toolbox. I'm bringing that up on your left hand or right hand side of the screen now. The buttons here on the right, the program crop decision steps. This will lead you through the information that you need to make decisions. It divides the process up into 7 steps. You collect any of those 7 steps, we give you an overview. You can click on an overview, look at a webinar, look at some FarmDoc daily articles, a link to our APAS tool, and a link to our FAST tools, and we also have some frequently asked questions. The other one is the APAS tool, and that is, and we will be going over that as we're moving through this system. As far as the decisions yourself that you're going to be making, just a background information, you probably all know this, but it's very important. It's going to be made on a FSA farm basis. So most farmers have multiple FSA farms. So if you have 5 FSA farms, you will be making 5 sets of decisions. They can vary across those FSA farms. Those FSA farms are defined by FSA, and they can have a landowner and a farmer, and we can have many combinations of that, actually. All of you have to agree. So it's not you can't split the decisions. Every FSA farm has to be the same. You've probably done some reconstitutions on the past, but you're fixed in stone right now. The FSA farms that you have as of August are the ones you're going to be making the decisions on, and you can't make many changes on those farms.
Yeah, that's a big reminder, and probably one of the things that makes the decisions we're going to walk through particularly difficult, and this is especially true for the program decisions, is these are irrevocable. So once you make them and that deadline passes, there is no opportunity to change that decision. There's no opportunity to revise it, and that's going to stick with the farm even if the farm is sold, if new tenants are on the farm. Or if you purchase a farm, you're going to be purchasing the program choice that was made on it. So, this deadline and this decision really comes with a fairly long-term outcome because it is not revocable or able to be changed in the life of this farm bill.
The 3 decisions you will be making for each FSA farm. Here's 3 sets of decisions. Program yields, and we're going to just hit these decisions up front here, and then we'll go through each one of those decisions in greater detail. Program yields, there's a set of current yields on that farm, likely set in the 1980s or maybe in 2002. You can keep those or update those to what the average of the average of yields from 2008 through 12, 90% of it. Decision's pretty straightforward. Pick the highest. So of which one of those two results in the highest yield, you pick the one that's the highest. Base acres, you will be given two alternatives, current or reallocated. And reallocated will be based on plantings from 2009 through 12. You will be given those two alternatives. Your FSA offices could print out those alternatives right now, and you'll make a choice, A or B, one or the other. We would, and we'll go through this again in detail, we would suggest picking the one with the least soybeans and most corn. That's what we expect to pay the most over time.
And one important thing to point out between these two decisions, notice the program yields is an update, which means you can increase the yield, the payment yield on that farm. But the base acre decision is a reallocation. So you will not increase or decrease the base acres on that farm. All you'll be doing is deciding between two versions of how the base acres are distributed among the program crops on that farm, which goes back to Gary's point about your comparison really gets into how's it shifting acres, particularly as between corn and soybeans in Illinois.
Those decisions will be made by February 27th, so we're looking at a shorter time frame there. They are actually the decisions of the landowner, and probably should be getting on those and getting those decisions made. The third set of decisions is how to receive the program payments, and you'll have three alternatives. ARC individual, which is a whole farm policy. We actually think that most farmers will not take that, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about price loss coverage in ARC County. And you can split the decisions by crop if you choose not to insure or use ARC individual. So you can enroll corn in ARC County, you can enroll soybeans in ARC County, and you could enroll wheat in PLC, all on the same FSA farm, and then each FSA farm could have different programs. The way it looks to us, if you're looking at what's going to pay the highest over the next 5 years, ARC County likely will make higher payments for corn if we see market year average prices above $3.30. Soybeans, if we see prices above $7.80, ARC County likely will in soybeans, and wheat it's $5.50.
Yep, and just real quick here before we move too much deeper into this, we had a good question on CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, and base acres, and that base acre reallocation decision. So just a note on how CRP operates. When that land went into a CRP contract, the base acres for that land are just sort of set aside or held in abeyance, really. So there's no program payments on those base while you're in the CRP contract. When that contract expires or those acres come out of the CRP contract, they return to the base acres they were when they went under contract. So if you put 10 acres in CRP and that had 10 acres of corn base, when it comes out of CRP, that is 10 acres of corn base. The program decisions that you've made for corn base then will apply to those acres when they come out. So the big thing on CRP is that they just return to what they were before you went into the contract. Hopefully that answers.
Again, just to reiterate, one-time non-revocable decisions. After those deadlines pass, they will last through 2018, and yield updating and acre reallocation likely will last longer than that. Life of the Farm Bill is through 2018. Yield updating and acre reallocation decisions are the responsibility of the landowner. So the landowner is the official one making those decisions. If the farmer has the correct power of attorneys, they can make those decisions, but if not, it's the choice of the landowner. Program choice is by who has the share of the crop. And if it's a cash rent situation, the farmer has that. And if it's a share rent, the farmer and the landowner will share in that decisions. They have to make the same decision, but they will share in those decisions. If people, or farmer and landowner, don't make a decision by that March 31 deadline, you will automatically be enrolled in PLC which may or may not be bad. The bad thing, though, is if you choose not to make an election, you will forfeit payments for 2014.
Yeah, that's right. There's some significant consequences to missing the deadlines or not getting a unanimous decision by that deadline. We had a question that just came up on the payment yields, and it asked whether you could update payment yields for one crop on an FSA farm and not another, and that is true. The payment yield decision is a crop-by-crop decision. So you could update corn, for example. You got corn base, you could update your corn payment yields and not update your soybean payment yields because they weren't higher than the existing payment yield. Again, you want to take the highest number for each one, but it is a crop-by-crop decision. That's different than the base acre decision. If you're going to reallocate, you're reallocating across all program crops using those planted acre numbers that FSA provided.
So now we've talked about those three decisions: acre reallocation, yield updating, and program choice. We're going to go through those decisions in a bit more detail and provide you the decisions, background on it, and maybe suggestions for making those decisions. When we're looking at this happens to be a screenshot from our base acre and yield updating tool, but this is the information that it will influence both your current yields and base and reallocated acres. In a letter you received back in August, you had for each farm a list of base acres. If you're in the Midwest or Illinois, that's likely to be corn, soybeans, maybe some wheat, barley, oats exist on some farms as well. You had acres in each crop. That came up with a total, which in this example is 100 base acres. You also had countercyclical yields, 2014 countercyclical yields. These are your current program yields. You don't make an update, these will be your program yields moving forward. The other piece of information that you got is acres planted in 2008 through 12, and those acres will be used to determine reallocated acres. So the plantings that you had in 2009 through 12 will determine what reallocated base acres look like.
Yeah, and that information is on that FSA letter, and so that's going to determine what you do. And I think to that point, we have a pretty good question here on the base reallocation. So if I'm on a corn soybean farm, can I reallocate all acres to corn? And the answer to that question is only if you have planted all the acres to corn or you have not planted soybeans on that farm in the 2009 to 12 time frame. So it is not, the base acre reallocation decision is not a sort of pick your favorite set of base acres. It is what did you plant on that farm and the ratio of what you planted to each crop as compared to the entire number of planted acres for that farm in the 2009 to 12 crop year. So you can't sort of pick and choose. You're selecting between basically the ratio from 2009 to 12 versus what the existing base acre distribution on that farm is. So it's not a choice in that regard. It's determined by what the planning history is. And that planning history should be determined, it's on the FSA letter, that should be determined about what was reported to FSA. That where they get those numbers is when you submit acreage reports to FSA. That's where they get that information. So if there's anything incorrect on that, we would advise getting into FSA immediately to try to get that corrected.
So here's just on the base retain or reallocate acres, here's an example. You will be given two choices. Retain. In my example, that's 54 acres corn, 45 acres of soybeans, 1 acre wheat for a total of 100 base acres. The other is 75 acres of corn, 25 acres of soybeans, total of 100. Again, you cannot influence the choices of those two. You will be just simply presented those two choices, and you will either select retain or reallocate. And here's our suggestion, particularly if you're in the Midwest, Illinois, you choose the one with the least number of soybean acres and most acres of corn. And obviously that we're making projections over 2014 through 2018 about which one of these programs make the highest payments. And we believe the order is corn And actually, we got this wrong on the slide. Corn, wheat, soybeans. Apologize for that. Corn first, wheat second, soybeans third.
And again, Gary, that's all based on that expected value out of the program. So remembering that these are base acres, so you're going to get paid. If you have corn base, you will receive a corn payment on those base acres for corn, even if you didn't plant corn in the coming year. So what you're setting up then is not kind of anything that dictates what you're going to plant in the future or related to what you're going to plant in the future. It is merely these programs pay on base acres, and so that's why you want to look, to Gary's point, that's why you're looking at which program crop has the most value under the program options available to determine what's the most effective set of base acres. So this is separated from your actual planning decisions going forward. This is merely on what kind of payments you would expect per crop per base.
And just reiterate that point. Let's say we choose to reallocate acres in this example. We would get paid on 75 acres every year of corn in 2014 through 2018. It doesn't matter what's planted on those years. If your program makes a corn payment, you would receive payments on 75 acres. We've had a question about, all right, you've not participated in a farm bill, and presumably that will mean that you have 0 base acres. If you have 0 base acres on that farm, there will be 0 base acres after this. So if you've not participated before this, there's nothing that can be done about that.
And in that situation, I'd recommend checking with FSA, because it's entirely possible that there are base acres associated with that farm, but you or maybe a previous owner or tenant just simply have not participated in the programs. But Gary's point is absolutely correct. You cannot increase base acres through the reallocation decision. You cannot get base acres if you don't have them. So there's no way to sort of expand the base, and that includes there's no way to get base if you don't have them. But those base acres would be on record with FSA. And so in a situation where you don't think you have them, I would recommend probably just double checking with them to make sure that there's not some record there that just because that they weren't enrolled in programs in recent years may not determine that. But the bottom line is you have to have base acres to be eligible for these programs.
So that's acre reallocation. You will be given 2 alternatives. We would suggest picking the one with the most corn acres, least amount of soybeans, and our expected payments ranking over the next 4 years are corn first, wheat second, soybeans third. And soybeans and wheat are reversed in that one. We've made a typo. Actually, I made it. I apologize. So,
well, Gary, another question that often comes up, and using your example here, a question that often comes up in this discussion is what happens to my wheat base? So in Gary's example, the reallocation decision would take you to 75 corn, 25 soybeans, and 0 wheat. So in that decision, one thing you want to keep in mind is you are getting rid of the wheat base. You're shifting them into corn and soybeans, and there will no longer be wheat base on that farm going forward. And you have to anticipate that stands for as long as there are farm programs and base acres. That it would take an act of Congress to allow you to ever get that wheat base back. So you are making a pretty significant decision on that going forward. But and knowing that programs will change, but the ability to get that base back is probably not going to happen. So you want to at least factor that in. It's still just one thing to think about, but certainly looking at these programs, that point about picking up more corn bases, that is going to weigh pretty heavy on the decision.
All right. That's at base acre reallocation. Now we're turning to yield updating. If you're going to update yields, you will need to provide yields per acre for the years 2009 through 12 when you planted that crop. So in this example here, we didn't plant soybean acres in 2011. We would not be providing yields for that year. The updated yield will equal the average of those years for 2009 through 12. It will be 90% of that, and there are plug yields involved in it. And in there's a plug yield for corn, soybeans, wheat, and all program crops. For each county, it happens to be 75% of the county average. In my example here, in this example, we have 126 bushels per acre. And what that would mean for corn is that 114 in 2012 would be replaced by 126, and that will help in some of those drought years. Again, though, it's 90% of that. Each one of the farms each one of the crops, you can make a decision to keep the current yield or update it. If you're looking at this example, actually you would keep the current yield because it's higher than the updated yield for corn. You would update the yield for soybeans because it's higher. So those decisions can be made individual for the crop, and the idea is to choose the highest. And again, these only impact PLC payments. We would still say update, though, because these have a way of sticking around longer than the life of the Farm Bill. And the last time you were given the opportunity to update anything was in 2002. Before that, it went back to the 1980s. So if we are going back, we would suggest updating those.
And a couple just sort of operational notes on that. Again, we've heard a lot from in meetings and discussions that your county FSA office will probably work with you pretty closely and maybe even just put in the highest yield. So they'll help you with that. Also, just sort of a note on how that works. You're not actually going to prove up your yields at the FSA office. You're going to self-certify what those yields are, and then that self-certification is subject to a spot check and audit. So you want to know you want to be able to prove them up should you get to that situation. But you're not going to walk in and prove up yields to FSA at the time. For the tools and the calculations, we recommend having your yield history with you, and crop insurance is usually the best example of that. And FSA has said they'll accept crop insurance records as well should you have to prove them in a spot check.
You're now seeing an example of the form that you could take into FSA for each one of your FSA farms. Here in this example, we have corn, 2008 yield 175, and they are asking then next to it record type, and we put a 1 here, which is RMA records or crop insurance records. What FSA is accepting and most people will use is crop insurance records, we suspect. And what you actually need there is that APH yield calculation sheet, and you'll need the actual yields for 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. If you got that APH calculation sheet, you have the documentation. You look at those yields on that, and you put them on this form and indicate their RMA, and also keep that sheet because that's the documentation. There's some points about that. Sometimes those crop insurance records won't match the RMA sheet. Actually, if you go into our keep or update yields, go into articles here, there is one documenting yields for updating under the 2014 Farm Bill using RMA records, which will cover a lot of the details associated with using that. Another point about updating is oftentimes or sometimes you won't have documentation. And let me just give you one specific example. Farmer began farming the farm in 2010, 2008 through 2009. They don't have documentation. What should be used in that situation is the plug yield, because you don't have documentation, which will lower the yields. But if you don't have documentation, you really should be using those plug yields. We've had a question about popcorn. Popcorn will be corn, and there are conversion factors, but I have not seen the conversion factors from RMA yet, FSA yet. I've got the wrong organization there, but there should be conversion factors associated with that.
And speaking of acronyms, we've got a question about what are RMA records, and for those of you that are not familiar with all the acronyms that get thrown around in this discussion, it's always a good reminder that we tend to forget to define some of those out. RMA is the Risk Management Agency at USDA. They're the ones that oversee the crop insurance program. So when we're talking about RMA records, we're talking about your crop insurance records that that you get from your agent that will have information about your yield history that's used in calculating your actual production history and everything that goes into the crop insurance program. So that's what we mean by RMA records.
So we've had a question about commingling grain. Is there an easy way to split it? One of this will often come up if you have enterprise records for a county, and then there's multiple FSA farms in that county. If you have an enterprise record, multiple FSA farms, and that's covered on this article as well, you most often the easiest way to handle it is to assign the same yield to each farm. If you don't want to do that, some sort of independently verifiable information needs to be in place to make those comminglings or to allocate it. So settlement sheets from different farms could be used to do that. That obviously gets into a lot of work, and does impact the time it will take to do this yield updating.
And again, our FSA is merely asking for you to self-certify what those yields are. So, a lot of that, I think to Gary's point, is that using that enterprise yield number is probably your best way to know what your yields are across all FSA farms under that enterprise unit.
And again, if these yields are below the plug yield, and the plug yield is set for each county and crop, the plug yield will be replace those actual yields. So,
and that goes for any year in which you've planted the crop but don't have a record of the yield for that. So you can look at that plug yield being used pretty much in a lot of those situations to fill in, but that will obviously impact what that potential updated yield would be.
All right.
So moving on to
our program decisions. Now we're going to talk about the program decisions and look at those program decisions. Again, this is the first two decisions will be done by, the deadline is February 27th. This is March 31. You will be chosen between ARC Individual, ARC County, and PLC, and we're first going to focus on price loss coverage and ARC County. If you don't choose ARC Individual, you can assign one crop to ARC County and one crop to PLC. And again, we're going to focus on those decisions first. Difference between ARC County and PLC. ARC County is a county revenue for a program. It will make payments when you're below a guarantee, and the guarantee is based on the 5 previous yields and market year average prices. So
and those are county average yields. So in the county program, you're not looking at actual farm yields. You're looking at the county average yields over the most recent 5 crop years. And
same thing with prices. 5 past prices. Olympic average pays on 86% of the guarantee, and the maximum payment is 10%.
Right, and we always want to stress that the prices used in these programs, and that goes for ARC County, ARC Individual, and PLC, we're using national marketing year average prices. And that is not a Board of Trade price. That is not the prices used by crop insurance. This is an average of the prices received by farmers over the 12-month marketing year. It's weighted by bushels sold, but it's the actual price received on those bushels. And USDA surveys this information out of elevators across the country. So it's a very different kind of price than what you may see on the Board of Trade in any one month, or that projected harvest price used for crop insurance. And again, that it's going to be determined by your marketing year. So, spring planted crops, that marketing year typically starts September 1. It'll run all the way through August 31st of the following year. So just keep that in mind, and the same prices are used across all these programs. So there's not a different price used in any one of them.
Price loss coverage is a target price program, and it will make payments when you're below a reference price. And the reference price is $3.70 for corn, $8.40 for soybeans, and $5.50 for wheat. And you can see here the difference in the programs. One's a price triggered by price alone. there's a price, or if the market year average price is below the reference price, there will be a payment. It will be multiplied by your program yield, and there will be a payment. Arc County is a county revenue program.
And Gary, you've got, just so we're keeping track, we're bouncing around a little bit because we've got some interrelated websites and a multitude of tools available to help farmers sort out these decisions. What Gary has up on the screen, so we've walked through the Farm Bill Toolbox, which is kind of your one-stop resource for articles and all kinds of information, as well as links into the APAS online calculator. And then this is the FAST tool that Gary's developed using and working with our APAS calculator and others to sort of give you the chance to do a very specific comparison. You can find this. There are links on the Farm Bill Toolbox to the FAST tools. It's also on the FarmDoc website, farmdoc.illinois.edu. And these are downloadable Excel spreadsheets that you download to your computer and then can and run different numbers on it. And so just kind of keeping track. Right now what you see on the right-hand side of your screen then is the FAST tool, the Arc County PLC comparison tool that we'll run through here.
And we're going to illustrate the payments from Arc County and PLC for a specific county. If you go into this tool, we can do this for a specific county. That brings in the county yields. This is DeKalb County, Illinois, for corn. And right now we have a PLC payment yield in there of 134 bushels per acre. And that's going to influence PLC payments. But let's walk through 2014. And again, here's 2014. Let's walk through the payments on that.
And maybe before we do that, again, one of the nice things about this spreadsheet calculator is it shows you that 5-year Olympic average, county average yield, and 5-year Olympic average, market year average price. And you see that Gary's got it highlighted for 14. So 14, that 175 then is your Olympic average from 2009 to 13, and the 529 price on corn here is your Olympic average price of those national market year average prices from 9 to 13. So you can see how that gets calculated, and we'll also note you see how that changes over time as new yields and prices get factored in. And so kind of pay attention to that as well, because that Arc County program, that benchmark's going to move as new year prices and yields come in. By comparison, that reference price under PLC that's $3.70 for corn will not change. It's $3.70 in 2014. It's $3.70 in 2018. So there's no movement on the reference price.
Yep. And as Jonathan said, this 529 here, it's the average of 355, 518, 622, 689, 446. It's an Olympic average, so we throw out the low, 355, the high, 689. And one other thing about this benchmark price calculation, you replace all prices that are below the reference price with the reference price. So this benchmark price can never go below 370 for corn. Guarantee 86% of yield, benchmark yield times benchmark price. If county yield times price, multiply those together. If it's less than the guarantee, you'll get a payment. And in this example, we get $25 payment.
And that's a per acre payment. And the way that comes out is that you get, for Arc County and PLC, both of them make payments on 85% of the base acres for that crop. So you see that $25 per acre factors in the 85% of base. So that would be $25 per base acre, factoring for the 85% of base that receive a payment under these programs.
So that would be the 2014 ARC payment. Here's the PLC payment, and we're going to get a PLC payment because our market year average price is $3.65, which is below $3.70. So we could get 5 cents times 134, again, times that 85% factor.
And this is a good reminder, and we can go crop by crop, and it actually is a reminder of a question we got in from some friends from Central California. We welcome them to the discussion as well. And this goes back to that base acre reallocation decision. And so part of what you're looking at as you go through these tools is the value of the base under the programs and comparing that. So while you're not making that program choice with the reallocation, your reallocation decision, you're going to want to think through the value of the crops base under these programs. And so where these per acre payments come in is a good way to see that. For Central California, obviously you might have a slightly different crop mix. particularly if you've got rice base. That's going to be a very different value. It's going to be a much higher value, frankly. And if it's considered japonica rice, an even higher value with a pretty high reference price. So we would, the rule of thumb stands, which is you want to make sure your reallocation takes into account how valuable that base is under the programs and the potential payments in these programs. In the Midwest, where you've got corn and soybean base, that's sort of the rule of thumb with corn base. As you move out of the Midwest, different crop bases are going to have different value. And without running through every crop and every base and PLC, reference price, so forth, you can use these tools to see which base for which crop tends to have the most value in the programs, and then go back to that reallocation and see which one increases or at least comes out with a higher number of base for that crop. So appreciate the question again, and we'll
And we would also suggest going in that case to the APAS sample farms and looking at a specific county, and we will show you how to do that.
Yeah.
Again, here for this one, DeKalb County, 210 bushel yield. We will know that number much better first week of March. So that decision or that payment will be known much better. If this gets too high, let's say it's 230, which may be out of range. But if we had 230 yield, there would not be an ARC payment. Just to reiterate, this is a yield or a revenue sort of program. 365 is the current midpoint of WASDE's range. This can range, or their range is from 380 to 320. If I put a 380 in here, you'll know what's going to happen to PLC. It's going to go away because it's above the reference price, and ARC goes away too. On the other hand, if we're at the low end, 320, ARC would make a $79 payment, which would be at the max. PLC's payment would increase to $57 because it's further away. I'm going to put this in at 365, and then I'm just going to start with $4 corn, go to 350, go to 3. These yields in here will influence ARC payments in 2015 through 2018. I'm going to leave them alone just to illustrate what price does.
And Gary, those are typically your trend yields, right? That's preset for the trend yields for the county, or what would be the expected trend for those yields, so that those are preset. You can change them throughout.
So if we have $4 prices, we would, and these yields, if we have 200 bushels in 2015, it would go down in payment. So it does matter what those yields are. $84, $38, and then going to zero. And what's happening here is this benchmark price is going down. As the lower prices enter it, benchmark price goes down. We do know for corn that the 529 will be the benchmark price for 2015. Now let me go to 350. PLC begins to make payments and will always be constant in this case because it's below the reference price and it's times the program yield. Here's 3, but in this case, our county still averages higher payments over the 5 years, but it's front loaded. So in 2017, 2018, that scenario happens, there would not be ARC County payments. Here's 330. So we're getting somewhere right in 330 is sort of a break-even price. If we get prices below that, we will have more PLC payments than ARC counties. Above that, it will tend to be more ARC County. And here's 3. So if we get below that $3, our PLC would make higher payments. If you want a really bad scenario, go to 250. And here you would probably be hitting payment limits, obviously, but 137 PLC would be making payments. ARC would make payments, but not as high as PLC.
And that's a good walking through those prices is a really good reminder of sort of the difference between these two programs as you try to sort out your decision. Price loss coverage, because of that fixed reference price that does not change, is really a program with your price expectations are that prices are just going to fall through the floor and stay down there. So obviously that low price scenario that's consistent over the 5-year life of the Farm Bill is what PLC is going to be more effective. Whereas the Ark County program, then, as you can see, is going to help with lower prices, particularly in the first 2 or 3 years. It's going to provide significant assistance where prices are lower, which is what everybody expects. But it's also going to help with yields. So if you have yield loss situations as well. But it's going to start losing its effectiveness in a really, really low price scenario. So, as we've talked about time and again, Gary, the big factor for this decision is what your price expectations are going forward for these crops. And, again, it kind of comes down to how pessimistic are you about prices for the next 5 years.
So here, again, we had a question. Is this benchmark price the same thing as the spring price? And spring price, I'm thinking you're thinking about crop insurance, and no, it isn't. Benchmark price is the average of the 5 previous prices. So if you believe for corn, prices above $3.30, you're probably going to be thinking of Ark County. Below $3.30, PLC. Many of you may be thinking of higher payment yields. We had a higher payment yield. Let me show you what happens here. $46 is the payment with 134. Let's say that is 164, which that's 40 bushels higher. You see it sort of switches. Honestly, though, you might be surprised with how, it doesn't have as big an impact as you would think. You're still sort of in that range where Ark County PLC is still sort of obviously payment yields do matter in that case.
And what might be a little bit obvious, but you do notice that only that payment yield only impacts your PLC payment. So just another reminder that the payment yields, while your decision to update those payment yields does not impact your decision on the program, the PLC program is the only one that uses the payment yield because the Ark County program is going to use that county average yield number throughout.
So we had a question earlier. CBO released their estimates of what would be the enrollment in Ark for corn. They were at 37.5%. We would suspect that they're low, I guess. I would suspect that they're low on that. Why they came out that low, who knows? It is an estimate, though. So
right. I mean, and part of that is kind of keeping in mind what that information was. CBO is the Congressional Budget Office. They're the nonpartisan economic experts for Congress that they estimate programs and what programs are going to cost. And as part of that, they make forecasts on what they think the market year average price will be over the next 5 years, as well as participation in programs. So it's like anything else. It's a guess. It's an estimate. It's an educated guess, if you will, trying to sort out what participation will be. And then for them, they're looking at how much the programs would be expected to cost under those participation numbers. I think, Gary, I think looking at their prices, and they've got $350 for the first couple years, moving up into $364, $375, and then $392. You could probably plug those in and see. But I think to Gary's point, if you're above that $330 number, it's really hard to make PLC work better for a corn crop in this situation. So, not to second guess the Congressional Budget Office, but certainly looking at the payment estimates, it's hard to see in those price estimates how PLC becomes a more attractive program, particularly they've got just over 37.5% of the corn acres going into Ark County, which, again, it's tough to know, but certainly at the price levels they're talking about, you'd see Ark County be more effective on corn base.
Here's, again, sort of where our break points are for those. And let me just show you, if you're interested, I'm going over to our web page again. Here's our Farm Bill Toolbox. Oops, I went too far. Here's the toolbox. If you want this spreadsheet, go into these fast spreadsheets. You can get the Ark County PLC downloadable here. base acre reallocation and yield tool is available here. So, and this one you can enter your yields, make your crop choice, and we will compare the expected payments from those two alternatives. One other piece of item that I want you to be aware of, though, is also this APAS tool. We have a link here to it. This goes to this site. If you go into APAS sample farms, this is going to give you expected payments by crop. If you go in there, you can make a choice of your state, your county, and I'm going to just do a Southern Illinois farm, Washington. And once you do that, this program will bring out a number of things. Actually, if you go into our step 4, there's a webinar on how to use this tool. If you go into expected program payments, we'll tell you that we've got the most up-to-date, and also that we're waiting for 2014 yields, which will come in the first week of March, and that, again, could change these estimates, in particular for 2014. But if you go into expected payments per base acre, choose the 5-year horizon, you will see payment estimates. And this bar is Ark County for corn, PLC, and we also show SCO payments in here as well. So this is corn. Corn is higher than wheat, which is higher than soybeans. And that's why we're saying look at minimizing soybean acres, choosing the more corn and wheat. We've had a couple questions. If you have soybean acres and if you're in those Southern Illinois where those where you're switching off corn and wheat acres, probably should come to this tool, get those downloaded, or take the base acre yield case and look at it. Those wheat, soybean, corn are a little bit more complicated, but in general, you want to choose the one that minimizes the soybean acres.
Yeah, and again, all across the country, any state and county where there's data available to be able to run that APAS tool, you can get these expected program payments by crop, by acre, or for the farm, all crops in the other tab. And just sort of a quick reminder of what this does. If you click on the sample farm tab up there, Gary,
Yep.
What we're doing with this is you're not actually entering any farm data. What this does is take historic plantings, scale it up to about a farm of about $500,000 revenue. So that's kind of the size of farm we're talking about. Using that historic planting number for that county, it's just simulating a farm. And so then those numbers at the top, the 412 for corn, the soybean and wheat numbers, those are run through the model using the price series you've selected up top. Run through the models if they're the base acres for that crop. And then that's where that expected program payment comes in. And as Gary noted, until we get those updated yields for 2014 for those county average yields, we're using trend yields in this estimate. So, these payments, as we showed in the spreadsheet, these payments are likely to change depending on how high the yields were for that crop in 2014. But right now you're looking at it on a trend yield basis using that sample farm, which is a nice way to get a sense of the programs, get a sense of what payments might look like. And as Gary mentioned, that really goes into how you make that base acre reallocation decision, which crops base seems to make the most sense under the programs, and look at that for your reallocation.
We had a question about what this does. 75% coverage level impacts these SCO payments. And SCO is only available for price loss coverage. And if you increase this percent coverage, we're now assuming that you're buying price loss or SCO from 86% down to 85%, and you'll see the net, which is payments minus premiums from those policies. We'll come to this at the end. The general rule of thumb for SCO, from our perspective, is that if you have an 85% coverage level combo product available to you, if you have RP at 85, YP, RP with exclusion, SCO actually doesn't offer a lot of additional risk protection because it only goes from 86 to 85%. We will talk a little bit more. Well, let's just keep going through this, and that. But here you get a feel. If you're looking at ARC County versus PLC, it depends on those price expectations. Go look at these tools and look at these. We've tried to summarize this a bit across those counties and crops here: 330, 780, and 550. Again, though, if you're really concerned about low prices, if you're concerned about 250 corn, you might want to be in the PLC program. ARC individual, we see limited uses here, and we'll come to the cases where we think it will be. 2 reasons why: it's whole farm, it lumps all the crops together, and that makes it harder to pay. And ARC individual pays on 65% of the base acres, where ARC County and PLC make payments on 85% of the base acres. Here's the situations in which it will likely fit. 1 crop, highly variable. In the Midwest, that might be high-risk bottom ground that usually has very good yields and then has low yields in 1 year. Another place where this might fit is Montana. Wheat, 1 crop, highly variable. If you're in situations where you have 1 crop, highly variable, those are the situations where this fits. Once you begin putting 2 crops together, it becomes really hard to trigger payments. And the other thing that I would say we would stress that you remember is that they add up all the ARC individual count farms together. So each of your FSA farms do not stand alone. They come together and are aggregated.
If they're an ARC individual.
If they are in ARC.
And I think the usual logic on that, Gary, right, is that if you just look at the screen here, to go from ARC County to ARC individual or to go to PLC to ARC individual, you're giving up 20% of the base acres that are receiving payments. So I think the sort of logic that we've talked about a lot of this is what other factors are out there that would make up that loss of 20% of the base. So in Gary's example, if you had just 1 crop you had a farm with only 1 crop base and a really variable yield, that might be a situation where the yield variation would be enough to trigger more payments more frequently or whatnot to make up that loss of 20% of base. So we don't want to downplay ARC individual. There will be some pretty specific situations where it will make sense, but as a general rule, you're going to need to find some reasons to make up that loss, that 20% differential on the base acres to make it work. And you can see here, Gary's back on the APAS tool where we can show you the ARC individual expected payments.
And so we very rarely find ARC individual payments higher than other program payment crops. If you have a specific situation that you want to look at in APAS, we would suggest using the custom farm operation, and that you could look at that specific situation. If we go back to a custom farm, build your own farm, you can go through here and build your own individual farm and look at that individual specific situation.
I think in the interest of time here this morning, we won't go through the build your own farm, but it's a little more work intensive as you got to enter in all your farm's data. But Gary's right. I mean, that's the best way to kind of see what ARC individual would look like on your farm.
We had a couple questions about plug yields. Is there a website to obtain county plug yields for each state? Actually, the base acre and yield sheet has those in them. So if you dial that up, you will get it. They're also on the FSA website. So if you go into FSA website, ARC PLC decision, it's actually on a bar on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yeah, and almost all the information, all this historic information on prices and yields, you can find that on the FSA website as well, and you can link through our tools to that.
Finally, we've talked about SCO. Let's hit it head on. What is SCO? It's a crop insurance policy. This is not something that you're going to get through FSA. You're going to buy it through a crop insurance agent. It's only available if you are not enrolled in ARC. So if you're in PLC, it's available. What it will do will provide risk protection from 86% down to the combo policy trigger. So if you're enrolled in a group product, ARP, you're not eligible for this. You have to be in RP, YP, or RP with exclusion. So let's say you're buying RP at 85, or let's say RP at 80%. SCO would provide protection from 86% down to 80%, and that SCO would pay in that range. Here's the kicker. It's based on county revenue, not farm revenue. So it's county that would trigger those payments only. It isn't on those individual farms. This just gives a graphical feel for this. Again, here's an example with 75% RP. Red bar, that would be protected by the RP policy, farm level matters. Black, SCO, would be triggered by what happens at the county. So the county, sometimes the county could trigger a payment and the farm wouldn't, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's a great reminder that it's that county trigger that is really the distinguishing feature of SCO. And so if the county has a loss below the 86%, then everybody in that county that has SCO coverage would get a payment, whether or not they had a loss on the farm. And the opposite is true. Even if you had a loss on the farm but the county does not trigger, then there's no SCO payment. And so I think that goes back to something Gary said a couple minutes ago, which is, if you can buy 85% individual coverage, SCO does not provide a lot for you because you'll be trading off that individual coverage at 85% for a county trigger at a point higher at 86%. So it's a big part of that factor.
So just summarizing those SCO observation, 85% coverage available. There's really little additional risk protection offered by SCO. When we look at premiums, we often see SCO and RP coming close to RP 80% coverage level costs. So, and this is more particularly true in northern, central Illinois, Iowa, Ohio, Indiana. You get in southern Illinois, it's not as close, but it's usually 80%. Close to 80%. The point here is that if you're looking at this as a way of buying a 70% RP policy, cheapening up the RP premium and getting some additional protection there with SCO, it's still going to be in that RP 80% coverage level. Over time, SCO could pay more than RP. We'll know after the fact. Actually, we would suggest if you got those 85% policies and you're currently buying at the 80 to 85% level, SCO's not that big of a deal for you. And you probably should be making your decision based on what ARC County and PLC do for you, not on the availability for SCO. Here again, though, there may be some specific cases where this fits and may dictate the decision. And let me give you a couple other examples. You're farming high-risk land. You can buy a fairly low, or you're often buying a fairly low coverage level there. Putting that high-risk land, if it can be segregated in PLC, if you're going to do some of those crops anyway, and then buying SCO on that may provide you some additional risk protection. So there are specific situations where you can see this working.
So we had a question here about what happens if you purchase SCO and then end up electing ARC. RMA's got some rules about how you can get out of that SCO decision. And I don't remember, Gary, if you remember the dates off the top. I don't remember the dates off the top of my head. But you want to double check that there could be a penalty after a certain date. There was for wheat, for example, back in the fall, there was an opt-out time frame for wheat on SCO. But you'd want to double check that with your crop insurance agent about how that's going to work if you choose ARC. But the big reminder on that is, and particularly for this program decision, is you cannot mix ARC and SCO. It can only be used in the case where you have PLC, and that's the big factor for the program decision.
So, just a reminder when the deadlines are. Base acre reallocation yield updating decisions have to be made by February 27th. ARC PLC election by March 31. Again, a lot of those decisions are pretty straightforward. I'd say, particularly for base acre and yield updating, I would begin those processes pretty quickly because you're going to have to get forms signed, which probably could back those things up.
One thing I just want to highlight and reiterate based on a question we got here. Remember the base acre reallocation decision and that yield update is for the landowner. So the owner of that FSA farm makes that decision. A power of attorney to a producer should carry through. You'll want to make sure your power of attorney is properly marked, that you would have that for future program decisions. But that's what that decision is for. The ARC PLC decision is for the producer on the farm. And so in a cash lease situation, in a cash rent situation, the landlord is not considered a producer on that farm. So that program choice in a cash rent will be made by the tenant, by the producer, not the landlord. And that does go to this question, which is who receives the payments under a cash rent. In a cash rent situation, the payments go to the producer. So that's goes along with why the producer is making that decision. But under the statute, you have to be sharing in the risk of producing the crop and have a right to share in the marketings from that crop to be a producer. So you want to keep that in mind as this decision deadlines approach. The landowner is going to make base acre and yield. The producer is going to make ARC PLC. And in the case of a cash rent, the landlord won't be making that ARC PLC decision. But I think we always advise for keeping good relations with your landlord is probably a good idea to at least let them know what you're thinking and what your decision is going to be on that farm, because that will stay with that farm even if you're not the tenant in future years.
We've actually now come to the end of our formal presentation. We're going to continue here for a while and answer some questions, but we're done, and we appreciate your time today. And now we're just going to answer some of the questions that I don't think we answered as we're going through this, and you typed in, and so we're going to go through that. All right, one of the questions: if you own land that is cash rented, but the owner nor the tenant have documented the yields that are specific to that farm, and if you don't have any documentation, you should be using plug yields. But here's another situation which I think this might be addressing. You have the farmer has enterprise units, which is all crops in all county. And the one cash rent land is subsumed in it. The alternative is to take that enterprise unit yield, and that's probably the simplest. Just put it on that, even though it's over multiple farms, take that yield. The alternative is to find some way to break it out, and if you've got commingled grain, that's probably going to be pretty hard. Another question is, if you don't want to do RMA or you don't have RMA records, what are your alternatives? And it's essentially any sort of outside variable information. The next most likely case is settlement sheets from elevators, taking those totals, dividing by acres farmed, and if you get those settlement sheets by FSA farm, that would work out reasonably well. When can we expect tea yields? That's a good question. Someday.
Not sure what the timeline is for RMA to get that out. The T yields used in the programs that should be in the calculations should be available, but from FSA on some of the historic ones. As far as future, I don't know when we'll get that. If you update your yield and current yield is high, that the farmer will retain the higher of the two. Yeah, in essence, and what we've heard this a lot. It's framed as a decision. What we've heard is in a lot of cases, the FSA office is simply going to plug in the higher yield for you, and it's still your decision technically, but obviously the decision that makes sense is to put the highest yield on record. So you'll see that a lot. I mean, that may be a county by county preference, but you'll see that a lot, that they'll just go ahead and update those payment yields if they're higher.
We've been asked what's the order preference for sorghum as it fits into this case? I would offer two suggestions. The first one is to go to APAS and look at APAS. The other thing is that we did a FarmDoc Daily article yesterday, January 27th. We haven't got this quite linked yet in our tool, but if you go into Table 2, what we did was average these expected payments over the 5 years by crop over all counties. And again, I would suggest you go back and look at your specific county, but here's the rankings. Peanuts first, canola, barley, flax, corn, sunflowers after corn. So corn, sunflower, grain, sorghum, then soybeans. So you see the ranking there.
Yeah, and the reason for that, grain sorghum, it's a little tougher to see, but grain sorghum actually has a higher reference price than corn. Grain sorghum's at $3.95 a bushel and corn's at $3.70. So that's going to change your thinking a little bit on that for sorghum. Yields are going to matter on that as well. But this farm bill actually has a different reference price for grain sorghum than you've seen in the past. So that's going to put it in a slightly different situation in this decision process. But Gary's right. Run the tools on it, especially with yields in your county and on your farm, and get a sense what each of these crops look like.
And just as general guidance, we see Ark County and PLC coming more in play for corn, soybeans, wheat, lentils, and oats. Grain sorghum, you're probably shading more towards PLC, but you should run the numbers yourselves. What if you own property in 2008 but have records going forward from 2009? I'm assuming that relates to yield updating, and really if you don't have the documentation, if you can't get the documentation, you are back to using the plug yield.
A question here on what does 330 and 780 represent? That was in the example that Gary showed using the FAST spreadsheet. What those represent are what we're calling the break prices, or the sort of the point in your price expectations for the future years at where PLC begins to make more sense or makes more sense or becomes even and make more sense than Ark County. So what that is at 330 or higher, you'd expect Ark County to be the more effective program on corn base. At 780 or higher, you'd expect Ark County to be more effective on soybean base, and at 550 or higher, wheat on wheat base. If you're below 330, then you begin to see PLC kick out an average payment over the 5 years that's higher than Ark County. So what those are the break points between the Ark County program and PLC for those crops. 330 on corn, 780 on soybeans, and 550 on wheat.
Same payment.
We got a question also about same payment. Comparing those Ark and PLC payments on the FAST tool. Again, those are completely dependent on what prices and yields you've entered into those 2014 to 18 columns, and it's certainly possible that you can find a price yield combination that'll kick out an exact same payment for Ark County as PLC. In fact, in many cases, at 330 will get you an average payment over 5 years that are either really close or dead on. And so, again, what you're seeing is how dependent on prices the two programs are. And for that spreadsheet, it's exactly using the price and yield you entered to calculate a payment. So you can, as I've joked many times, you could probably drive yourself crazy putting in different prices and yields and spend a lot of time trying to sort out those expected payments. But you're getting an expected payment using exactly the price and yields you put in. So it's possible to find Ark County and PLC making equal payments in any year.
We had a question. This is called the PLC Yield Worksheet. It's also CCC 859. So this is the form that you will be you can use to report yields. It's called the PLC Yield Worksheet. It's Form 859. And again, we would suggest the reason it's called PLC Yield Worksheet is because these program payments only affect PLC payments. We would still suggest, if you're even choosing Ark County, that you you update those yields if they're higher. And again, if your updated yield is lower than your current yield, you can you can choose to accept the current yield, and you should pick the one with the highest.
But yeah, right. Updating that payment yield does not lock you in one way or other on the program choice. The program choice is independent of this, so you can update payment yields and take Ark County. In that case, the payment yields won't be used in the payment calculations. They'll just be part of the records for the farm. So these are separate, independent decisions, but that yield's only used for PLC, which is probably why the form uses PLC. But you're not locked into PLC just because you updated yields.
We've had a question about the slides. Well, you can get a copy of our presentation. Email either myself, schnitke@illinois.edu, or Kappas@illinois.edu, and we will get those slides to you.
And we'll send them. We'll make them available on the website and send them around. This is probably the last question here. We're over our allotted time, and want to be respectful of everybody's time. We really appreciate all of you that joined in today. We had quite a few attending this webinar. We'll be doing some more of these webinars today and tomorrow, as well as in February and March. So stay tuned for that. We also want to thank the Illinois corn growers for their partnership on these webinars. The last question we want to make clear about is SCO and whether SCO decisions stay with the farm long term. No. SCO is a crop insurance program. You have to go in and purchase it every year. So you're not locked into an SCO decision year after year. What does not change is the program choice. So if you have, let's just take corn again, if you have Ark County on corn, then you're ineligible for SCO every year that this farm bill is in operation. But if you take PLC on wheat, you can get SCO on wheat, and then it's a year-by-year decision of whether or not you want to purchase SCO from your crop insurance agent, but you're not locked in. And I think with that, we've probably exhausted patience and sanity on farm programs.
If you got a question, email us. If you go into Farm Bill Toolbox, and we know there's customer support at us, probably the best way is email us, and we will respond to those emails.
And I'd also encourage, as we go through those steps, encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions, the FAQs. We have used all the questions we've gotten from previous webinars, from meetings and whatnot, and they're in there. And you'll often find answers to the questions you might have. And so we also encourage you to look there and see if the question's been asked and answered. We've tried to do that throughout the process, and we'll continue to update those FAQs as we go. So with that, again, thank you very much. Thank you to Illinois corn growers, and stay tuned. We'll talk to you again soon when we have.
This webinar will be archived soon. Probably look for it Friday or sometime after that. And there's two more, 7 o'clock tonight and 7 o'clock tomorrow. So see you all later.
Thanks.